Dear friends, collaborators, all of you sharing your time with us in this moment, interested in the program that will follow. I would like to welcome you on today's lecture by Eleonora Montagner. My name is Violeta Kachakova, and I will shortly introduce the program of Lokomotiva, which is called Contemporary Culture and Cultural Policy / Other Spaces. This is the program organized in Kino Kultura, which is a project space for contemporary performing arts and culture, but also a program organized in the frame of a European project called ACT, Art Climate Transition. Due to COVID-19, we needed to rearrange our program and transferred a significant part of it into the online digital space. Since Kino Kultura as a physical space, it's closed. So for us, as for other cultural organizations, internet is becoming our new temporary public space in which we act. So this year, as part of this program, Contemporary Culture and Cultural Policies, we have two program activities. One is called Archives of Reflection, and the other one, it's the series of lectures with discussions. This series of lectures started last week with the lecture of Katja Praznik. And today we have honored to have with us Eleonora Montagner, which will be properly introduced by my colleague Biljana Tanurovska, who will also moderate the discussion and which will follow by the lecture. So last but not least, we will finish this series with next week with Alvise Favoto, and his lecture will be on July 6th at 8 p.m. Central European Time. The series of lectures with discussions addresses some interesting topics, at least for us and the field in which we are interested to work, such as the position of artists and cultural workers in the labor market, the relations between artists, managers and public, as well as mutual influence with the social authorities and the environment in which we operate. And these lectures will also bring forward ethical dilemmas and thoughts related with the labor and art, social justice, responsibility towards the relation between us in the field, but also society in general, introducing environment, nature, and etc. This program is funded by the Ministry of Culture, the City of Skopje, and the Creative Europe program of the European Union. And for realization of this program, I would like to thank to my colleague Biljana Tanurovska and Zorica Zafirovska, but also to Nena Tomkin, who support us in the realization of this online session. So I will stop here and give the floor to my colleague Biljana Tanurovska, who will continue with the session.
Thank you, Violeta. Good evening to everyone also from my side. And I have a pleasure to introduce Eleonora Montagner as our guest tonight. She's the second, as Violeta announced, in this row of 3 for this year. And in this program, I just wanted to add that we would like to somehow introduce, meet, and hear new emerging thinkers, writers, and philosophers, which are working in the aspects, as Violeta announced, that we are interested in, and we will be, they will present through their lectures. So shortly, I met Eleonora in Dijon on a conference of NCAT Network, and but her biography is that she graduated in contemporary aesthetic from the University of Milan, Italy, and obtained PhD in philosophy at the University in Burgundy in France. She is currently teaching in philosophy at the School of Business in Burgundy School of Business. And she's there a co-editor of the Master Science in Arts and Cultural Management for the same institution. Her research focuses on the program of otherness in aesthetics, phenomenology, and contemporary thought, and on the application and consequent implications of philosophy to management, accounting, and business ethics. This was very interesting perspective from my let's say, point of view. And therefore, we invited her in this program. So she will talk on the topic of arts participants and their fidelity to art event on Badiou application to the event of the art concept. So she will talk about the notion of the event through the Badiou's perspective, but also about the field of and how it's related to the field of art management and meanings and interpretations of diversity in the cultural and, let's say, creative field. So she will present the egalitarian perspective of Badiou's event, where he brings diverse actors from the field in dialogue. So this is the very interesting part that I would say we can hear about, but also she will talk about these tensions that these relations are producing, as well as she will put some kind of a cartography of actors in the field and, as I said already, the relations that they produce. Also after her, as Violeta announced, we continue with Alvis, and she will explain at the end how her introduction of the Badiou's event is related to what he's going to talk about, and this is with speculative approach and notions of responsibility. And mainly we're interested here in the aspect of responsibility of us as cultural workers, curators, managers, and possibility to use this speculative approach as one of our, let's say, curatorial strategies. So I will stop here, and I would like to welcome Eleonora. I will go off now, and later I will come up just to moderate the discussion and put your questions that we will get on Facebook to her. So
thank you.
welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So at first, I would like really to thank Biljana, Zarisa, Violeta for inviting me on this streaming session. I'm really happy to be able to present to you this we can say this lecture about Badiou. And I can also say that I'm a little bit sorry because I really would like to be, I would have been pleased to be in Skopje in person, and I hope to be able to do it when it will be feasible in the future. So really, that's really my bigger thanks to Biljana, Violeta, and Zorica. And I really thank also Biljana to present myself, but I just recap a little bit my, we can say my background, because maybe just I don't want to focus on myself because this is not the point, but just to know, to put in some elements in place to be able to share my experience in the artistic fields, we can say from the point of view of education, and to stress to some elements that can make me important, because we can say that my interest in terms of research and activity are linked to what I choose to study, why I have to study Badiou, and why I choose to introduce to you this theme of today, so the arts participants and the fidelity of the event. So because I really started to change a little bit my interest, we can say, and because at the very start, from a philosophical point of view, I faced the question of otherness in phenomenology. But the encounter with practice has pushed me to approach to Badiou's thoughts, you can say. But because in my activity, in terms I'm co-responsible of a master in arts and cultural management, and I am a teacher of philosophy in a business school. So for my activity, I deal with students of art school, with students of music school, but also with artists who are working with managers. And sometimes I encounter some possible problems or real clashes that can be generated in belonging to a different approach or field, or just to another kind of education system. So I chose Badiou because he openly faced the question of the fidelity and the infidelity to the event, and also he focused on the clash between this true kind of attitude towards the world. And in phenomenology, the question of otherness is addressed, we can say, in a way that is too weak. So for me, Badiou is the way to face this question, to the tension that we have in the different, we can say, parties of the art field. So Badiou is more maybe suitable, and let's see what happens, because maybe this will be also important for you, and I would like also to share your experience if I will be able to like really explain well this thought. So now I introduce you the structure of my lecture a little bit, because it can be a little bit abstract to some extent, and so I need really to give you like some really important elements to understand Badiou's thoughts. So at the very start, I will like basically introduce, for those who don't know very much who is Alain Badiou and why is important or innovative for us today. Then I introduce you, on the second point, the concept of the event and fidelity to event. Then I will focus on the event in art, and then I provide some examples. Especially of an example will be new patterns, which is a project that has been started in Dijon at Le Consortium, which is an art center, now is a museum. And then I will introduce a little bit to Yves Chiappello and his system. So first, Badiou. Who is Badiou? So Alain Badiou is still alive. So normally in philosophy, we prefer to study philosophy who are already dead and they don't move at all. But for this time, I started to study a philosopher which is still alive and really productive, we can say. So Alain Badiou was born in Rabat, Morocco in 1934. He was one of the most important philosophers of the event with Zizek, with Deleuze, and with some classical philosophers, for example, as Whitehead, Leibniz, and Stoicism in general. So he studied at ENS, which is the École Normale Supérieure of Paris, which is one of the top, we can say, institution for philosophy in France and maybe also in the world. And he studied at the ENS with Althusser, Canguilhem, and Lacan. But he's also a mathematician and a dramaturgist, which is really, really strange, you can say, and nuanced profile. In the 60s, I founded the PCU, what is in French the Parti Communiste Unifié, so the Unified Communist Party, and he begins to militate against the Algerian war and in favor of the decolonization of Algeria. Then, after being nominated professor of philosophy in Rennes, then he started to be professor at the Experimental University in Paris 8, which is Vincennes, from its creation after May 68. And he founded what is called the UFC, so the Union Française Communiste, which is we can say a Maoist-inspired communist Marxist-Leninist party, which really I'm not really able to really focus on this because it's a really nuanced definition, we can say. And he was a top chairperson of this party until the 80s. Just to provide those information to let you know that in the career of Badiou, we can see that he was a philosopher in a top institution in France, but also an activist. He was also an activist, and he is still an activist now, especially for refugees and what in France we call sans-papiers. Then just to finish and to quote some important books, if you are interested in those books, he published in 1988 his main work, which is L'être événement, which is in English, Being an Event. And it was completed in 2006 by the second volume, which is called Logique du Monde, or Logic of Words. Then in 1998, he was appointed emeritus professor at the École Normale and emeritus professor in 2004. So what is important also to state, just for a little bit in Badiou's thoughts, is that for Toscano and Power, which are some experts on Badiou's thoughts, all Badiou's work is nothing more than an attempt to understand the defeat of the ideas of 68 by the majority of the Maoist-inspired members of the French Communist Party. So we can say that his philosophical activity has raised also as a reaction to what was the historical situation in 68. And the objective that organized all the life of Badiou has been to carry on throughout the egalitarian hypothesis, or what he calls like the communist hypothesis, where communism does not mean the historical manifestation of communism, but for Badiou, the problem was to be able to carry on the pure idea of equality. In this sense, he can be considered as a classical, but at the same time radical philosopher, because, and for this reason, maybe is suitable to an interdisciplinary field, because often Badiou goes to the source of the concept, and for this reason, it can allow us to rethink everything from the very start. So, I just have to introduce Badiou because he is not like a mainstream philosopher, we can say. And before defining what an event is, I summarize a little bit in 3 points why Badiou is important for us today, here, now, we can say in Dijon and in Skopje, and I hope in Skopje, because maybe, so for example, to me, Badiou is also, as I told you, is a philosopher of the event. And the concept of event allows us to rethink the subject of the event, especially in art, as a collective entity. So the first thing by which Badiou is important is because Badiou is thinking out again a concept, like the concept of the subject. But this concept of subject is not at all an individual, it's a collective, we can say. And for this is the first reason we can say. And the second is that by rewriting the idea of the subject or the subjectivity in this way, we also rewrite the relationship in the artistic field, or the way of conceiving relationship in the artistic field. So, and for this reason is really important. So first, because he rewrites the idea of the subject. Second, because he rewrites the idea of the relationship. And third, because as we will see, he also leads us to rethink the practice of fidelity to event of art as an ethic responsibility. And we can say that is an ethic of care, we can say, because in studying the concept of event, he also introduced the concept of fidelity to the event. And the fidelity to the event is to some extent, we can say, a practice of care. And this can maybe be important for you as curator or possible like working in the artistic field, and for us as parties of this field. So now I introduce the concept of event finally, because it's the moment. We can say that I focus a little bit in the, not in the main, we can say works. I focus especially in ethics, which is, we can say, a work which is easier to read, we can say, because Logique du Monde, so logical words, for example, it's 1,000 and I think 200 pages. So I think maybe it will be really important for you to start from this book, Ethics, in 2008. So the concept of event will be dealt especially by starting from this book. I will not focus too much now or today on this book, but we just need to know some elements in order to be able to articulate the background. That is, in this text, Badiou try to shed light on the word and the concept of ethics, and which is for him an abused and overrated word. This word often concerns practices and decisions that start from a concept of the human being that debase or degrade life. And this concept do not allow for embodied and singular situation to be taken in consideration. So the concept of ethics is really, the usual concept of ethics is really linked to sometimes to what Badiou calls an ethics of death. an ethics of, and instead of this ethic of death, he preferred an ethics of immortality and what he calls an ethics of truth. And for this reason is introduced the concept of event. So what is important to state is that he focused to the concept of event because he wants to enlighten another kind of ethic which is not related to death. And they are, we can say, when we have to define the concept of event, we have almost three pillars who are really important to us to understand this concept. So the first is the concept of, for sure, event, the second of subject, and the third of fidelity. So just to define the event for Badiou is a force that is born on a breaking point and generates the unthinkable or the unimaginable and makes man a subject which is capable of truth. This is really, like, we can say, abstract quote in a sense, but this is not so difficult to understand in the sense that the event, in more general terms, we can say, is a contingent act that produces a novelty with respect to the previous state. And this event structures time and space with respect to a before and to an after. Means, in a first level, according to a simpler meaning that is also the most common, an event is an unexpected break that creates a before and after. So, for example, thinking about the word event in our everyday life, for example, the 9/11 was an event because we can remember, for example, where we were when the event happened and when it happened. So, and it is structured, so this event can, we can say, structure our life in a before and after the 9/11. But what is important to state that there is not only this first level of meaning, but there's another level that is the more specific meaning given by Badiou. So this event, this break, this caesura, it's the starting point from which lives, which were previously usual lives, are starting to structure themselves, but what Badiou defines as the subject of the event. So we know that at the very first step, we have an event that structures its life from a before and after. But what is important to state is that from this starting point, some subject started to structure their lives in a new way. So the event is therefore something that makes something else happen from the situation, opinions and established knowledge. And this in this making something else happen, this event creates a new subjectivity. This new subjectivity can see the world as a new reality that was not there before. And this subjectivity will structure its life from this experience. So this is the novelty in Badiou's thoughts, is like linking the event with a new subject. And also we can say that this is linked to the pure idea of equality. Because, for example, in all the example that Badiou makes in his books, Badiou associates the event to the affirmation of an equality, the pure idea of equality. So in this sense, the event emerges from a void, and in emerging, makes present and materialize the idea of an equality. In the case of politics, for example, which is one of the most common example that Badiou provides, in the revolution we see our hidden social class, for example, suddenly comes to light, affirming a desire for equality. And he also provides some example, for example, as the case of Spartacus. It's a really interesting example that he provides in his books. So in the case of Spartacus, which is the slave revolt in Rome, Spartacus is aware of living in this new subjectivity, and is aware of the event, of living in an event, and he gives the name to the event by saying, we slaves, also want to go home. So by stating this sentence, for example, Spartacus is able to express the desire of equality. And for this reason, the example that Badiou provides, in all the example that Badiou provides, there is always a desire for equality, which is related to the idea of an event. So the event is always the emerging of the pure idea of equality. So, and for this reason, we can say that Badiou provides every time an example which is linked or connected with politics. And we can say that also perhaps in every event, there's a political matrix in Badiou. What we can also say there is, to some extent, there is a typology of the event. So Badiou determines 4 subtypes of events. One is for sure politics, and for this reason, he provides a lot of examples that are related to politics. Another example is of a subtype of event is science. The third example is love, and the fourth is art. So also the art is a kind of example of the event, and the event as a pure idea of equality. So I continue just to, for now, I try to state what the event is, but the second pillar to understand also this logic and this philosophy of the event is the concept of subject. So what happens when an event like a contingent act take place? This contingent act can take place and then die. It can die. But if the event takes place and it roots in the life of individuals, it gives to individuals the possibility to become a subject of the event. It means that after this event, the subject structure their life or his life according to the fidelity of the event. So the subject of the event is therefore we can say a result of a practice of fidelity to the process of truth, which in other words, because this is a quote of Badiou, which means that the subject is the result of a practice by which the subject is able to take the event and to put it in practice in his everyday life, point by point, day by day, making this truth real. So we can say that we have a scenario which is, we have, to some extent, we have an event like a contingent act. And to some individuals, this event has a real important meaning, and they became subject because they are able to take this, we can say this contingent act and to put this contingent act in practice and into reality. So the subject is the person who is able to put enact the event in his everyday life, and is also the result of this practice. But we have to pay attention because the subject of the event is not the individual or a singular human being, but the result of an act, and to some extent of a common act. So it's a community which is working together that make the event real day by day. So the subject of the event is not the individual, is this, we can say, community, which is able to put the event in act and to let the event live, we can say, forever. So the subject of truth is therefore this conformation or collective. For example, especially is a collective in the case of politics, and the dual in the case of love, for example. So the subject of truth is able to gather, organize, decide, implements point by point a procedure of truth, what Badiou calls a procedure of truth. Starting from the case of the primordial event, point by point, decision by decision, from what was a contingency, a destiny, a duration, a fidelity, a commitment, an obstinacy is created. So we will see, but to some extent, the subject of the event is the person who is really obstinating is pursuing this act in a we can say in a faithful way, but also with some obstinacy to some extent. And I think, I don't know in your opinion, but me as a teacher, I feel that I'm a little bit obstinated with my activity, for example. The subject of the event and equality are linked also. So, because the equality has to do not only with what the event makes present with its novelty. For example, the idea of equality is not only in the fact that we can see that for the subject of the event, there is a desire of equality, but also because we have to cooperate to practice the event. So the equality is not only in this desire of equality, but also in the cooperation, because all the parties of the event became the subject. So they are, we can say, equal in this subjectivity. They don't have any hierarchy, we can say. So every equality is the equality of the cooperation of work is true that those who participate in a procedure of truth, they cooperate in its becoming for Badiou. This is a quote from the Ethics, the book Ethics. So equality is, we can say, the fact that also the who participate in a procedure of truth, so into an event, they are cooperating in its becoming. So becoming a subject of the event means becoming a subject thanks to the practice of this belonging to this collectivity. And the third pillar, so in this sense, I introduced the third pillar, which is the fidelity. Fidelity to the event is therefore the name of this process. So because it's the activity that produced the subject of the event, and it is the way in which, point by point, the subject of the event shapes its existence in function of the truth of the event. It is also the way in which, point by point, the practical subject makes what was a contingent, we can say, act, and is able to let this contingent act take root in reality, make it eternal to some extent. It is the way to make the event alive, and fidelity for this reason is maybe in short, taking care of the event. So there's a dimension of care in fidelity because it's the activity, the obstinate activity by which a subject is able to continuing and to pursuing this process of truth, what Badiou calls the process of truth. So what is important to state is also that not all the subject, so we have a triad, which is event, subject, and fidelity. But this is not the only possible position with respect of the event. We don't find subjects that are always faithful to the event. There may be also some, we can say, individuals that, because we can call them individuals, that are indifferent to the event. For them, the event is really not important. They are not touched. They don't change their lives for the event. And it's a possible position that we can have towards the event. But if the fidelity take place, other position may also take root, for example. And infidelity is the second position. So the third position, because we can have, we can be indifferent from the event, we can be faithful to the event, and we can be unfaithful to the event. And in the case we are not unfaithful to the event, we have two types of subjects. That are the reactionary subject and the obscurantist subject. And so now I start to, we can say, to show you, we can say, to the abstract part or the definitory part of this thoughts. But then I go to another point which can be maybe easier to understand, and it's especially the art event. And I will provide some example to let you know, or to some extent, to let you understand all those parties. So we have like the subject which is faithful to the event, the indifferent to the event, and the unfaithful to the event. So the art event has been defined in Logic of Words, his book of 2008. And in this book is, into some short chapters, Badiou focus on art. And we can say that the art event, in the art event, initially there is a tension way to represent the conventional, or there is a tension between the traditional way by which we are representing the sensible, the reality, and the form that represents this reality. So in one side, we have a conventional or a traditional sensible, and the way of representing this like perception of this sensible reality. And we have a tension between these two parts. Everything which is not represented is formless. In the field of art, the event is a rupture of the established regime of this tension. So in an art event is, we can say, the eruption of a novelty, and it's a new way by which what previously seems formless is now perceived as a form. So in some abstract terms, we can say that we have, we can say, common way to perceive the reality, and a form which is able to represent this reality. In the art event, there's an event, we can say, by which we are able to, we can say, to perceive the world in a different way. So what previously seemed to participate of the formless is now perceived as a form. Therefore, the subject of the event is the one who is able to practice this new way of giving shape to the sensible in his everyday life, point by point and day by day. And to some extent, the subject of the event of art, and if we have to pay attention on it, is therefore not the individual artist who discover a new way of representing the reality. It's not at all the individual artist, but anyone who contributes to the process of the fidelity of the event, to put the event into reality and to make it alive. So in this sense, we can say that Badiou provides an example, which is, for example, the Cubism movement. And for example, in the Cubism, we have, we can say that is an emergence of a new movement in arts. And the subject of the event is not the singular artist, but is the movement in itself. So Cubism, like all the events, marks a break with the way of which, in the way of which making art, so it's a break by which we can say that is a world before the Cubism and a world after the Cubism. And to some extent, this is a real event. In the event of art in a particular, we can say in this event, we can say that the sensible reality produced a break with the world prior to the Cubism. This event can be shown first of all, we can say from the first aspect will be a contingency that can be, for example, a punctual painting, a moment, a saloon, an error in the artistic production. So this is a contingency. But then there is a, we can say that there is a, after this singular random contingency, this contingency became rooted in reality and society by a subject who is faithful to the event. So a subject who point by point articulates his whole life and his whole existence around this event. And this subject is not the artist, is, we can say, the collective forces which is structured his life by this new event. So the subject, once again, we have really to be careful, is not the individual, but is composed of the artist and all those who support the movement with their work. In our case, the Cubist movement, including curator, financiers, users, managers, and so on. the problem that these people have is how to be faithful to the radical content of Cubism with their work. So every, we can say, parts of this subject, common subject, has a really important problem, which is how I can be faithful in my work, in my everyday life, to the Cubism as a movement, how I can practice like my faithfulness to the event in my everyday life and practice. So this is not, we can say, a theoretical question, but is really a practical question, which is how to practice, we can say, this work. In this sense, they have a problem of fidelity, that is how to make Cubism, or another movement, continue to exist without compromising its original essence. And however, we can say that if we go back to the topography that I gave you before, we cannot like be faithful to the event of Cubism. We might just give this, we can say, also basic and banal example, but we can be faithful to Cubism, but we can also be indifferent to Cubism. But what is maybe important now to state is that we can also be unfaithful to the event of Cubism. And finally, we have other two kinds of subject that can result of this unfaithfulness or infidelity to the event of, for example, this movement. And this is maybe the point in which Badiou is really interesting, because we can have a reactionary subject and, as I said before, an obscurantist subject. And for Badiou, the reactionary subject is represented in the event by the, we can say, the academicism. So the tendency to bring back the novelty that breaks into the scene all of a sudden in another pre-existing category. So the reactionary subject, or which is a kind of subject, who is unfaithful to the event, is a subject which is not considering the event as it is, but it wants to bring back the force and the novelty of this event to something else, to a pre-existing category. And in bringing back this novelty to something else, it depowers it, it reduces, it minimizes it, in order to demystify the innovative and revolutionary power of the movement. So in this sense, it materializes in the form, we can say that there is a specific logic form, which is basically the event A is not A, but A, it must be brought back to B, where B is something pre-existing. So this is, I think, can be really interesting in the way we are conceiving, for example, the real practice of creator. So we can say that to some extent a form of academicism, so a form of overthinking, we can say, or over-qualifying or over-categorizing art can be a form of unfaithfulness to the event, and a form of the reactionary subject, and a form of bringing back what is new to something else. So academicism can be just a way to don't be faithful to the event of art in general and to the novelty of this movement. But there's also another kind of obscurant of subject which is unfaithful to the event, which is the obscurantist subject, and is represented in the event of art by iconoclasm, which does not reduce the event to something other, but it hides it, it denies it, and if possible, can destroy it. For example, in politics, we can say that the obscurantist subject for excellence, we can say it's the fastest position in politics, but not the fascism as has been, we can say, in his historical, historical, we can say, manifestation. But the fascism has the tendency to, we can say, to hides, denies, and we can say destroy the novelty that the event is going to manifest. So we can say that in politics is the fascism, but for example, in the case of Cubism, for Badiou, Cubism is the obscurantist subject you can say in this example as being, for example, we can say all the practices that have defined Cubism as degenerate arts, and all those people, or we can say subject, or forbids all the exhibition of we can say the Cubism. I heard like a sound, maybe. No. So so we have so I just picture a little bit, or I just give you like to some extent all this cartography of the event, the art event to some extent, and I also would like to provide some example if I can. If I have maybe some a few minutes about, I think I will have a few minutes. And another example, one example of, we can say, fidelity to event can be considered, for example, the example that have been put in practice by the project New Patrons that has been done in Dijon at the Consortium, which is an art gallery, or we can say now a museum. So the example of the New Patrons is, we can say, an example of, we can say, fidelity to an event, because it can be considered as an illustration of a way of being faithful to the event, because the New Patrons, or Nouveau Commanditaire, has been called in French, is a project that has been carried out and continues to be carried out in Dijon, thanks to the work of François Hers, which is an artist, and Xavier Duroux, which has been the director of the Consortium, and in which we can see a collective logic of take responsibility in the process of formation of the work of art. And now, if I can, I will share with you my screen to give you like one example of what they did in the 90s in Dijon. For example, in Dijon, this is one of the example of what they did. For example, in this project, which is the New Patrons, in this project we have, you can say, the activity of an artist, which is for sure the artist, but the people who are like, who are, for example, asking for a new piece of art are not at all like, we can say, a public structure, or we can say a financer, we can say. They are almost like the community is the actor, which is responsible of what we in French we call the command. So basically, what happens is that in the university restaurant of Dijon, the people who were working in this university restaurant, who are like pictured here, they ask to Yang Piming, which is like the artist, to represent themselves in this, into, as you see, for example, into inside this university restaurant. So what happened during this process is that all the workers were the people who were in charge of commissioning this artwork. To some extent, there's a lot of, we can say, a lot of actors who were able to participate in this, we can say, common subject, or in this process. And we can say that the actors were more than just the artist and the mediators, or the sponsor and the politician, but also the patrons were basically the community. And to some extent, we can say that this practice in Dijon has been established by a protocol in which in the protocol every party has a special responsibilities and a special commitments to this artistic work. In this way, so all the parties were involved in a process of creation, and in all this process, every actor was able to have these works in the process. So this tentative, we can say we can say this effort to put all the community in the arts creation is a way to represent the fidelity to the event in an egalitarianistic way to some extent, because we don't have any hierarchical, we can say, position, and the artist is not the main subject, but the piece of art and the creation is a collective, we can say, practice and activity and process, which is created through this protocol that has been established by the consortium. So just we can say, if you don't, I will talk about this protocol if you will have other question about it, but just to focus just to conclude this presentation is that for example, some authors, as Chiappello, focuses on the relationship between artist and manager, and Chiappello, who was like the co-author with Boltanski of the New Spirits of Capitalism, analyzes the different types and ties between all the parties in the artistic field. For example, with managers, artists, and all. And she wrote on the end of the 90s a book which is called Artist versus Manager. So in this like we can say book, she was able to categorize all the type of conflict that can be present into the art field. But for example, for Chiappello, the clash could be like, for example, the training, the sociological differences, the education, and their attitudes toward arts because of their past, we can say. But one can see the conflict not as a conflict between the job position, for example, or not for like the special education that I have before, but as a simple relationship between the fidelity and infidelity, or the indifference of the event. So we can also try to understand the conflict in the artistic field, not by, for example, a sociological point of view, but just by stating the concept of fidelity and infidelity to the event. In this sense, Badiou is transversal because it may happen that an artist can be unfaithful to the event, and manager can be faithful to the event, and curators can be unfaithful to the event, and the community can be faithful to the event. So we have all the different parties, and all those different parties can be can have a specific attitude towards the event, and this attitude is can define, we can say, their position, and not, for example, they just their job, etc. So the new subject, which is created by Badiou, it's a new subject which is a community, and this is like the way of defining this is the way that lead us to define and redefine the relationship in the artistic field. And I think I was running out of time, so sorry.
Okay, thank you so much, Eleanor. It was great to hear this kind of like really perspective from of Badiou, that of the and also related to the art event. Probably there are many questions, but I don't get any now here. But mine. That I would like to relate maybe to the last thing, what you were saying, is that you said that also curator and a manager can be examples of 9 unfaithful actors to the event. But can you say something more about it? Can you give an example of that? How a curator that probably take care of this event can be unfaithful to this event, or is it possible that also a curator can be indifferent to the event, maybe?
So I think that there is thank you for this question, because what I tried to say before is that in every with this new concept, we can say, which is can be maybe I would like also to have some feedback to know if this concept can be we can say it if this concept can be useful for you to understand, like because I think that sometimes we have the perception that we have some curators who are not faithful to the event of art. They don't really are interested in the arts as in its core. Sometimes, for example, a curator can be unfaithful to the event when he covers his curating like activity with too much academicism, for example. In covering his activity with too much academicism means that he doesn't see, he's not able to show the event as it is, but he show the event by this logical structure, which is this artistic movement is not this artistic movement, is similar to something else. One, too much academicism can bring to can bring to some kind of infidelity to the event. Because if
so you mean, maybe I can ask you, is it possible that even then a curator that it's having the critical perspective can be the one that is faithful to event, because that can be the, as I understand, the perspective where he or she brings the novelty, and this is one of the things.
His critical way is critical, for example, is critical perspective. If it's covered the event, we can say of art, the core event of art, or the specificity, because, for example, this specific movement is able to create a new way of seeing reality, a new way to give a form to this reality and represent reality. Mm-hmm. If the curator is not able to see this tension, to see this link, and he cover this relationship with other perspective, with too much academicism, etc., he is unfaithful to the event. Mm-hmm. And we can also have some manager, for example, that can be unfaithful to the event, because managers have to deal with the market. And in order to be able to sell, for example, an artistic artwork, they have to be related to something else. Because sometimes it's really difficult, at least for arts, it's really difficult to let the people perceive the novelty, because we are not able to see the reality as it is. Mm. We prefer to link what we are seeing to something else. We like what we like. Sometimes it happens also often with in the market, we buy what we have bought in the past. We like what we already like. We are not able to really see reality as it is and novelty as it is. Mm. And so for this reason, sometimes it's really, the market is really, we can say it's a reactionary subject, because
so how is market, you're saying how, so market reacts to the event as a reactionary subject, you're saying?
Market is, for sure, in its structure, is a reactionary subject, because we buy...
Isn't it the obscurantist one, or...?
No, because it still is in this relationship of reaction, because it doesn't want to suppress the art, because it needs art to be done, but it wants to bring the art back to something else in order to be able to sell it. Mm. So what happened is that in order to sell, we bought what we already like, we bought what we already seen, we bought what we already, and we have to relate the novelty to something else in order to be able to sell. For this reason, managers are in a difficult position. They are like the front line against the reactionary subject, because they have to be able to be faithful to events in a system which is basically reactionary.
Mm. Because you're relating a manager to the market and to the relation of selling the artistic event. But but
if it's related to selling, if it's related to selling.
If not, then the manager can be probably the
not all the managers. The manager were not
faithful one. So how to be the faithful manager is actually to be not related to the market, in a sense, to simplify, but not really.
To be related to the market, being faithful, it's really a challenge, because to some extent, to be faithful to the event means that we are able to see a distinction from a novelty and a new way of representing this novelty, which is, and we have to be loyal to this tension. And but if for example, if we have like, if we want to bring this novelty to something that already existed, this is a way to be like to be unfaithful to the event.
Unfaithful. Okay, we have a question from Professor Neboj Šavilić. He's an art history professor here in Skopje. And he's asking how you, not Badiou, will define the role of the art critic or art historian, which must be distanced, in brackets, regardless of his fidelity to the event, since the notion of history and historization is the core line of Badiou's understanding of subject as opposition of the structuralism.
So, if I understand well the question, because it's really, we can say,
so it's like the distance, kind of like the art critic has to have the distance in order to comment on a certain things. Is it this possible? This is, and also the notion of history, in that sense, he's asking, since the art historian deals with this. And historization is the core line of Badiou, understand, of the subject.
I think that I cannot see, we can say, the difficulty to be distanced being faithful to the event. I don't think that this, the distance and the faithfulness to the event are two concepts that are, we can say, in opposition. So to me, to some extent, I cannot see when we can say be faithful to the event as an art historian is, we can say, a way, is something which is in opposition to be distanced to some extent, because I can be faithful to an event, a special event in art history, and I can practice my faithfulness to the event, but I cannot understand it. And I would like also to talk with this with Neboj Šavilić to understand why to be distant can be an opposition or a problem. If I understand well, I don't think.
Okay, maybe he will come. But maybe we can go to the next question to Victoria Ilioska. She is thanking you for your input. And she says, I was wondering if you maybe know a frame that already exists, or in general, if you can imagine a frame where some dynamics are changing in the art field and the artist is the one who is choosing the curator. Choosing is in brackets, like the artist is inviting the curator to curate her work.
I think that maybe in this new pattern protocol, in this new pattern protocol, I don't know a specific frame in which it happens, but I know that, for example, in this new pattern protocol, all the parties involved in this protocol can invite a specific artist, for example. For example, the community can invite a specific artist. And for example, the artist can invite a mediator, or the mediator can also be the third part, which is putting everybody in link with. So this is like a more, we can say, they're more focused into the action of producing the piece of art and less in establishing the parties. in a really, like, we can say, rigid way. So I think that maybe in this protocol, I have to maybe to think about it, and I think that in this framework of the new pattern, that there's the possibility to invite the curator, but the problem is that this protocol is really wide. And I think that I have to like see all the the examples that have been done in Dijon, for example, all over in France and Burgundy. And maybe it happens that the artist invited the curator, or the community invited the curator. So
does in understanding on this fidelity of an art event should be something with inviting, or it's a communal thing, or it's a kind of a community that gathers together? It's not more like someone is
like
inviting.
Community will gather together, and they can choose the curator, for example, because it's the community which is choosing, and everybody is involved in all the process of art creation.
But isn't the curator part of the community, or it's someone else which is
someone else? It has been also someone else, but there's a lot of examples, and everything changes because the protocol is quite wide.
But we can see it as a part of the community, as a part of the art event, understood as a community, not as an individual subject, but as a community, but also can be separated out of this community. So
they can also invite someone else, but it depends by the, so the protocol is quite wide. It happens also that invite a curator, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You have also thank you from Nebesha Village. And what's the time? 9 and 10 minutes. Maybe I can just ask another question. And this is like with this that I wrote, like, Badiou associates the event to the affirmation of this equality. Maybe this is in a relation to artist and a curator and a manager, and what is this equality and how he associates it, and how he associates it. And if the art event, we can imagine, is the event where the equality is affirmed, the pure idea of equality, as you said, are these relations of equality possible? Or it's not, or it's someone that invites someone, or are these relations of equality possible?
So the relation of equality is, or we can say, all the practice of the event of art. All those people who are faithful to the event are in a relation of equality, because the subject is not like the artist anymore, is not like the curator anymore. Everybody is involved. And if someone is loyal to the, we can say, is like faithful to the event, is in a relationship of equality. Otherwise is not, is another kind of subject, we can say. Is, for example, an indifferent subject can be like, the practice of an indifferent subject is the one who is not like equal, for example. Just he wants to make his job. For example, in real practice, it's just one wants to make his job. His job is like in this. He sees his job in this way. He can be totally indifferent. He's a reactionary subject when he really, for example, wants to cover, to change the event, etc. But he can also be an indifferent subject, and he wants to state a hierarchy, for example, in order to be able to organize better things. But in the real framework of Badiou, taking care of the event of art means that we are not in a hierarchy, and we are in an equality system.
Okay, if there are no other questions, as I can see, since it's 9 and 11, maybe.
I saw it was running out of time.
No, I would like really, no, we are on time. We're okay, I think. And yes, I would like to thank you for bringing this perspective of Badiou's event in kind of rereading of our practices in a certain context, artistic, professional, but even larger sociopolitical as we are in. It opened a lot of questions for me, for example, how we can work in this artistic context with these positions of reactionaries and obscurantists, which are many, I would say here. But anyhow, I would like also to ask you maybe to say a few words how we can go from this, your perspective and your lecture of Badiou's event on the next, and this is Alvisa Favoto lecture that brings this perspective, as I said before, of subjectivity, or as also something related with the notion of responsibility. And what we said, it's how we can extend these relations that we were talking about now today in this frame of art event among us as human beings and professional in the field to something which is the larger environment, such as like nature and other beings. Yes. And maybe you can say a few
I
things
think
more
that in
about
the
it.
next lecture, so we saw so far how the caring of the event as the way of practicing the event has been established in relationship with the infidelity to the event, etc. Maybe in the next presentation, we will focus more on, we can say, on responsibility and into this practice as it's really, because I just give the framework in a really large sense, and the next time we will focus on responsibility and especially in the speculative approach. So the next time the focus will be really into this practice and the practice of caring, for example, that will be introduced in the next session, in the next lecture, we can say. But also what will be like the focus of the next time will be focusing into this practice of responsibility, and also I think into the speculative approach, which is a way of caring and be responsible. But what it will be also interesting is that the perspective of the next lecture will not focus only in human actors, because the subject of the event is more into human actors, but maybe the next focus will be also in non-human actors that are really important nowadays to focus on. I think I cannot see you anymore.
Sorry. There is one question more, but maybe you can answer this directly on Facebook to Bill, because we are already in very late, so we have to finish. And it's the question, I'm unclear how the curator or manager enhances the original fidelity of the artistic event. Maybe shortly and we go end.
I think you can say also that Badiou is like a philosopher and a mathematician, and how we as philosophers, we are saying, this is the real way to enhance in a really practical terms. But this is like we can say, I can give you like a short answer. Enhancing this practice is how it's we can say the task of the person who is loyal to the event, and he has to put all these strategies and all these efforts to do this. But to do this, the tension has to be clear, and he has really to carrying this relationship to the novelty, and carrying this relationship, the tension between the two. For example, in the art event. For the other events, we can also discuss further, and I will be happy to give a short answer in Facebook.
Yes, okay, maybe you can join us with Elvis, and we can continue on the 6th of July, 8 p.m. CET. So we can continue also this elaboration that you started to talk about on the question of Bill. And yes, thank you again. Thank you to everyone being here. It's very hot in Skopje. I'm getting now sweat. And I hope to see you in Skopje in live next time. And hope to see everyone on the next Facebook event as part of this series of lectures and discussions. Thank you so much.